Just look at Jimmy's technique. It kind of sounds almost like two guitars. It's creating this contrast. A mentor of mine told me something that's always stuck with me. He said the most important effect is the pick. So when I was young, I was more excited about pedals and guitars and all that kind of thing. But as I've matured, I've discovered that that is actually more than just true. It's actually the secret to being a great player. So music is made up from melodies, right? But it's all about how you play those melodies. And there's all these articulations and inflections and ways of kind of projecting the notes, like plucking, snapping, raking, staccato notes, hybrid picking, chicken picking. There's so many different ways of making those melodies come alive. I mean, just check out the different sounds that Mark Knopfler gets. It's the way he's playing with his fingers, it's creating this contrast of different types of sounds, like the way he's kind of really makes the guitar come alive. I mean, you can play just any scale. It just sounds flat, or you can make it come alive by using some of these types of inflections. So you know when people say the tone is all in your hands, you can never sound like Jimmy because you don't have Jimmy's hands. It's super annoying, right? Well, in a way you can sound like your heroes, but it's not in the left hand, it's in the right hand. I mean, just look at Jimmy's technique here. It's so fascinating to see his picking hand up close. So today we're going to look at the techniques some of these great players use to really make their solos speak and come to life. So I'm going to show you 3 different techniques that can take a dull, boring sounding scale and make it sound amazing. So according to the classic textbook, Your Brain on Music, scientists have done these experiments with instruments just to see kind of how our brains perceive the music. And one of the interesting discoveries is that when you take instruments and you remove the very first attack of the sound, it becomes really difficult to tell the difference between instruments. Like the sound of a violin and a trumpet are hard to tell apart once you remove the attack. So much of the sound and the tone comes from the way you're actually plucking or picking the strings. Like James Burton, like listen to the way James Burton plays here. When James plays, he's using this kind of version of hybrid picking, and he actually uses a finger pick, like a banjo pick. That creates a very cool sound because it's creating contrast in the sound. You know, so when he's playing Mystery Train there, Mystery Train, he's basically just going from an E to an A like this. And then basically it kind of sounds almost like two guitars because you're doing this kind of alternating bass. And over the top of that, with the finger pick there, you're kind of hammering onto the E, and then you go to the A. So you put that together and you've got... I played with him once, and I was really excited to see how he got his sound. You know, I was expecting to just learn all this stuff, like how he mics the amp and how he dialed in his EQ to get that kind of legendary tone. But he walks into the studio and he just plugged into the amp, and it was just magic. It was the James Burton sound, you know, and that was one of those points where I learned it really is all in your fingers. In fact, here's a little clip of me jamming with him. That that was a really fun moment, just getting to play with him. He's such a cool guy. And his playing is so perfect, and there's so much control in his fingers. So one of the things that contributes to players like James Burton sounding so good is they're able to make their playing sound so alive and so vibrant and exciting, and not just flat and dull and the same. So how do you get that sound, right? Well, when you think about it, a big key there is they're using contrasting sounds. They're not using the same picking technique or the same technique over and over again. They're actually contrasting and creating the different timbres on the guitar. And great players are really, they're masters of articulation. And they use a combination of these different techniques of, plucking and snapping and scraping and pinching and digging and, all these different kind of sounds. James Burton is kind of like known for his chicken picking. Actually, let's hear him talking about it here. This is pretty cool.
With maybe a 2-string chicken picking sound.
So that sound it's like percussive and exciting, and most importantly, it really projects, and it kind of like it jumps right out of the mix. If you're playing with a band or if you're playing on a record, it really works amazingly. And it sounds great in country music, but it also works in rock music. And when you got more overdrive on, it becomes, it's like the sound when you hear it like that, it's very fun and quirky and kind of a happy sound. But then, when you add overdrive to that, it kind of compresses it more. And it really becomes like a mean, cool sound. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to get that sound. And basically what's happening is you're alternating. You can do this with your fingers or with a pick and fingers, or you can use a pick like this. And each is going to give you a little bit of a different sound. But basically the idea of chicken picking is where you're combining a very short muted click or a cluck before the actual note. So it kind of gives you this effect. So it's a short percussive note. I'll do it without the finger pick a minute. So you put your middle finger on the third string like this and the pick at the same time. And then that gives you that dead sound, right? That muted cluck. So you create that short staccato sound. And then with your middle finger that's already on the string, you pull it up and pluck. So you get this sound. So that's basically the chicken picking. And, it sounds like this when you put it together. And a good exercise you can practice with that is just to kind of go up the scale. So with each note, you do that little cluck and then the pick. So you go. So it's a really cool sound, and it just makes the notes jump out of the mix, And you can do it with your fingers too and kind of achieve the same result. Sounds a little bit different. So if we're in the key of A, or you can do it with 2 strings as well. So if you just kind of go up and down that pentatonic scale, you can make it really come alive by adding some of those muted clicks in there. And you can also kind of create that sound with just the pick as well. It's a little more tricky to do because it kind of naturally happens when you're just using your fingers and a pick, because you get that alternating, contrasting sounds. But you can create that sound too by just accenting with the picks. So the way you do that is by accenting certain notes and then muting other notes. So for example, if you're playing through the scale, you can play up through those notes and then mute to get that dead cluck and then press down again. So you get. And it's just all ways of like projecting and bringing those notes to life. A similar kind of idea is using pick rakes. So like, for example, Stevie Ray Vaughan's classic for that. Just check out how cool this sounds from Little Wing. So it's a similar idea of kind of putting this kind of percussive sound in before you play the notes. So so basically what you're doing there is you're doing a rake. So you're muting with your left hand, and you're raking across the strings like that, and then you go to your note. Or Hendrix would do that too. So that little lick there, hammer on, you rake across the strings, and then land on the next note of the next chord. So if we're playing in the key of A, when you go to the D, and you just, I'm actually going, kind of raking across the chord, muting the middle note here. So I'm muting the G string there, and then landing on the D. That's another cool way you can add that kind of life. And, adding those rakes in kind of gives it that exciting kind of swagger to the sound. Another example of how to kind of breathe life into the sound is using what are called rest strokes and free strokes. And the idea there is like a rest stroke. It kind of comes from classical guitar, but on electric guitar, a rest stroke would be where you pluck a note and then the pick rests on the adjacent string. And it gives this really kind of bold sound that projects, but it sounds rich and warm. A free stroke is where you're just kind of plucking the strings without hitting the adjacent strings. Just kind of like a normal stroke. So when you mix rest strokes and free strokes, it creates that contrasting sound that is really exciting. So for example, so there I'm starting with the rest strokes. I'm kind of digging in with the pick. Really projecting those notes. And actually I do a little rake. And then I'm doing free strokes. And when you play those free strokes, the notes sound kind of cleaner and brighter. So that's a great way of creating, again, contrast there, is rest strokes. So you see how they're on this D note, really emphasizing it. And then ending the lick with free strokes. So there's so many ways of making your music come alive. So that's one example, but basically just using these ways of creating contrast in your playing so it doesn't just sound flat. Using these snaps and rakes and different types of picking really kind of projects things. So anyway, I hope you found this helpful, and give us a subscribe, and also let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what techniques that you like to use. I'd love to hear from you. And hopefully you can use some of these techniques and have some fun with it. And remember, turn it up.